Welcome to Intelligent Human Leadership, leading yourself and your team. Do you ever find yourself grappling with a lack of confidence in your team? Or battling the relentless waves of concern and fear? Are the pressures to meet client expectations and the burden of missed opportunities weighing you down? On this podcast, you'll discover the strategies and insights that will reignite your team's morale and help you find the harmony and knowledge you seek to propel your business forward. Here, we explore innovative ways to reignite your creative spirit and achieve greatness, empowering you to lead with intelligence, compassion, and resilience. If you're ready to dive deep into your core of leadership challenges and be guided toward success, here's your host, founder of Steward Your Business, David Carr.
Welcome back. So glad to have you here at the Intelligent Human Leadership Podcast, where we know ourselves to lead ourselves and our team. And that's really a theme that you're going to hear throughout these episodes is how do you know who you are so that you can effectively lead your teams? Those are people that you're in charge of, whether you're the business owner, director, maybe department head, group manager, maybe you just have one or two direct reports. I come from over 20 years in the environmental consulting world, where I worked in both the private sector and the public sector, and I recognize there's a challenge there in this field, in this industry. For those of you that are in this industry, the AEC industry, architecture, engineering, environmental consulting, construction, in this industry, what we find is there are challenges leading authentically. And I'm excited to share with you guys this episode today because it's going to be part of, actually, a preview of what's coming down the pike this year. I'm actually in the process of putting a book together by a friend and fellow colleague who I have been trained on through Powerality. You may have heard me talk about that in the past. Certainly have covered that, on the Business Roundtable podcast, but I want to bring it here specifically in this episode because I was listening to some other episodes and going back and having some great conversations with colleagues, and what I realized was those of you, particularly in the environmental consulting world, that have had certain training, skills, abilities that have been developed, what you might not recognize is your behavior style, how you show up, may or may not be in alignment with what I'd call your preferred behavior style. There's ways we present, there's ways that we adapt, and there's some different terms and assessments that go into this. If you've done ever DISC training that talk about that, how do you adapt? And what I want to get to today is, number one, are you recognizing, are you in your preferred behavior style, which you're going to have much more impact and influence on those around you? Or are you acting in a more presented behavior style because that's the way, we'll get into it, that's the way a client or co-workers, leader, maybe that's the way you were raised. And so I just had a conversation with a woman yesterday about this, where we were talking about how you had to show up a certain way because that was the quote-unquote acceptable way, or that was the traditional leadership way. And so they had to mute, if you will, themselves. They chose that. Maybe not consciously, subconsciously they chose that. So this is so important, the authentic leader, and that you show up in this way, particularly in the environmental consulting world. That's, like I said, spent over 20 plus years in this world. And I recognize my challenges in moving from a technical person to a manager to a leader and these different roles, and how I struggled at times fitting that in with what I'd call now my preferred behavior style. How do I show up well? For those of you maybe haven't listened to me before, or this is just catching this, my personal why is bringing people together to accomplish great things. That is a connector. That I am an additive multiplier, if you will. That wasn't always appreciated where I was at times. Certainly, at times it was, and other times it wasn't. So I just want to give you a quick understanding here of this behavior styles, understanding this tension, if you will, between your presented style versus your preferred style. And oftentimes you may not recognize it. So how do you recognize that? If you're having to spend a lot of energy and focus, it doesn't come natural, it doesn't come like breathing air, it comes like, I'm just taking a lot of energy and focus to you, that should be a warning or an indicator. Doesn't mean it is ultimately, but if you have to lean into, so for example, I work with some clients that are not as, I say, people focused. Like, again, I'm very people focused. I'm very extroverted. I like to connect with people. It's not that they don't care about people. It's just their energy and focus is in different aspects of the business. And so they have to learn how to pull in different team members. Excuse me. And so what happens, though, is if you're in a continual presented style, like I have to show up this way all the time, and you start to feel the stress, the challenge of, you're not feeling purposeful, maybe perhaps, or you feel like I like the actual work that we do, but the way I have to show up to get the work done isn't something that just feeds me. It doesn't give me the energy that I normally would get. When you hear about people in the right position, just loving what they do, you see the energy, you see the light in them. And so I'll start externally and we'll kind of work our way in. So here's something to think about. We have market expectations, right? How things are shown, how do we market certain things, how do we present certain things. In fact, I'm working with clients and we look at proposals and they say, we want the things done in this font and this number of pages. These are physical, or these are deliverable type things. But think about that in behavior. How are people asking you to show up? And it may or may not be in their best benefit. It certainly may or may not be in your best benefit. And so if you understand that, you recognize, okay, how can I get perhaps somebody else on my team or adjust, at least understand if I have to present, but recognizing the longer you have to stay in a presented behavior style, the less effective you're going to be. And this is about understanding, it's about maturity, it's about recognizing and valuing the different voices. I like to use the example of our physical body. You think about my hand, and those of you watching, I'm on YouTube too, so you can watch the video. But if you're the hand, and if that's your preferred way of being, is the hand reaching, grabbing, pulling. But you're saying, well, I want to be the eyes. Well, the eyes are for looking and taking in information. It's a different way of interacting with the world. Neither one is bad, right? They're not bad. We need eyes, we need hands. It just means we can't be both things. We need to know how we work and how we'll show up better. The hand is great for grabbing things, picking up things. Eyes, we need to take information. There are different ways of processing information, right? How do we make decisions? How do we communicate with one another? So when you think about this in the external world, there's some things that we can look at. We look at kind of market expectations, look at client relationships, even industry standards. I've talked with many amazing, powerful women in the industries, particularly of environmental consulting. And, granted, I'm a white male, been around doing this for a long time. There's women that have come into the industry, into leadership positions, and they're saying, well, you should show up as, a man. And they're not a man, they're a woman. They have different skills and abilities. Now, they may be similar. I'm not saying they couldn't be, but they're being asked to show up in a different way, or they're asked to be, they want to show up in a different way, and they're being asked to say, well, just conform to this. This is the way we do it. This is the way we communicate. This is the way we share information with one another. And so what happens is when we kind of try to get into this way, and there could be industries, it could be organizations even, that they have a certain way of being, and they say, well, present this way. Now, if that's your normal, preferred way of being, you're going to enjoy it. You're going to lean into that. You're like, man, this is for me. But if you're not, it's going to be a struggle for you. And I would ask either, number one, is that the organization I need to be a part of, if they're going to be really rigid like that, or are they open to exploring different ways and modalities, ways of being? So I'm going to give you a brief understanding of power anality, in that we look at it in a quadrant kind of compass way. And so if you think about this, and for those of you that are scientists or like geography, think of it as a compass. So we have people in a hemispheres. So people in a northern hemisphere, a southern hemisphere, eastern, western hemisphere. So when we understand kind of where people's tendencies are, I'll give you an example of the heroes that we have. And what I like about the Powernality, and this is where I'm going to be writing a book about this on superpowered leadership. So stay tuned for that. We'll be covering that in future episodes, and you can look for that book later this year. Super excited about that. But there's 4, core ideas of, I'll give you an example of myself. In the terminology of Powernality, I'm called what is an energizer. So somebody that brings people together, very positive, very engaging, and that is great for many clients. Sometimes it's too much for certain folks, and that's okay. I've done really well, for example, market expectations or business development. I've done very well there because I'm big on relationship building. I'm big on listening and understanding. And so this can help when you have to go to networking events and things like that. But again, if that's not your normal way of being, so an opposite, if you will, is what we call in Powernality calculator. So think of somebody that's very detail-oriented, very risk-averse. They want to make sure all the steps are covered. It's not that they're not relationally oriented. It's just when they are, it's about making sure that these goals, objectives, these steps are taken, and they're very methodical. I wish I was as methodical as that. I haven't been at times, and that's caused me challenges. But then I realized I could lean into that and help. If I lean into what I know my strengths are and my preferred way of being, then I recognize, okay, well, there's limitations here. And so I'll just get into briefly here some internal challenges you might run into. So there's the external things we show up, how we're showing up there. Internally, we look at team dynamics. We look at those that are inauthentic. And this is where I really can dig in and where Steward Your Business is really powerful, when we can get in and start to unlock people and understand where they're at, what motivates them, where do they naturally show up the best, and where are you being maybe asking them to show up, and I say inauthentic, or in a way that just isn't natural to them. It's not that they can't do it. It's just not going to be in their best interest to stay in that place. And so if you're inauthentic and you're saying, well, I got to present this way, I've got to show the team I'm this way, and it's not your natural way of being. So if I was an energizer, using that term, there's also a term called commander we talk about. Commanders are very straightforward. They're to the point. They're very direct. And they're about the mission and the vision first, and then they'll get to other things secondary. And it's very important. I took it very personally at times where they were so pointed and so on the move that I was like, well, can we talk more? Can we relate more? And they're like, no, we got to get this done. And so I learned over time to appreciate that voice. I needed it. Like I was pushing the brake on some things. Well, they were hitting the gas. Well, if you're doing both gas and brake at the same time, that's not going to work. So you have to figure out how to toggle between those voices and recognize not one is better than the other. Recognize, oh man, this is good. You're in this place. And if you're going too fast and you're like, oh, I do need the brake. Hey, David, come in. Can you help me evaluate this a little bit and understand it? And I recognize one of the things I had to show up candidly was more of a calculator, which I'm not naturally, but I recognize I had to learn some of these details. I had to learn some of these things in order to show up well, because I didn't understand the difference between a presented behavior style and a preferred behavior style. And I was showing up inauthentic. And what happens is I didn't even realize it. But when I was doing that, it was frustrating people because they were like, why can't you get that? You said you could do this. You're going to be like this. And I realized I'm not. But I was trying to be that way. I was trying because I felt like that was the right thing to do. Because I didn't know any better. Instead of saying, I need help, or I know I have to recognize my limitations. Early on in my career, I'd get a performance review, and we would look at strengths and things, and then we look at these things that I didn't do or I missed. And I started to, early on in my career, any of you guys have conducted a performance review, you might have a tendency to focus on all the weaknesses, all the areas you've missed. It's not, in my opinion, the way you want to focus. You have to be aware of your limitations. You have to know where the boundaries are. And where do you get help? Where do you lean in and reach out? But to focus on those and not your strengths, not your preferred way of being, you're going to get limited returns on that. Your personal well-being is going to diminish. So think about the psychological toll, honestly, it's taking on you to present a certain way, to hold this. I mean, we see this today in social media, marketing. There's a certain image that people put out there, and they try to, they no matter what, I mean, I've been guilty of this, but I want to share and be authentic with everybody. So I go live, I provide direct insight into my life because I want you as the listener, you, my potential client, to know who you're getting. This isn't, I'm not different on the other side of this camera when you meet me in person. And as you're listening to this and taking it in, when you work with me, you're going to get what you're experiencing here. There isn't a change there. My lifestyle, the way I show up, the way I help people, but there are people that do show that. And one of my mentors, Bryce Prescott, who actually helped me build this podcast, just talked about that on one of his episodes of Media Automated, where he was talking about fake followers and people kind of following along. You do not want fake followers. You do not want people that are following you on a presented behavior style, because they're going to be disappointed in the long run, because it's not sustainable. It's not in a place where you're living truly authentic. And it's going to burn you out ultimately, in my opinion. I started to feel that. And so while I can't solve all the problems here in this podcast, I'm going to give you some takeaways that you're going to be able to listen to and implement here at the end of the podcast. But I want to cover a couple more things before we get there. As you do this for your personal self, you look internally and you look at how it affects morale and the productivity of your team. I've only seen it positive as you lean into your presented behavior style, and then you can start to pull that out of others. Again, remember, we talked about at the beginning of this episode, know yourself to lead yourself, know your team and lead them. You're only going to get more effective, you're going to be more productive, you're going to be able to make contributions and ultimately be more profitable in the business. So look at this, and then we can actually look at the organizational culture here. This starts with yourself, and then it radiates out. So, our company culture, our employee engagement, how we all show up, how are we as a company showing, and are we leaning into our preferred behavioral styles? Are we saying, no, we want kind of carbon copy molds, and this is how everybody needs to be, and recognizing, no, we're all, think of, again, the body analogy. There are these different elements, and so we don't necessarily need to diminish one to lift up the other. We just have to recognize in the organization, where are those needs? Where are those behaviors and those styles of being best suited? That's one of my strengths, honestly, is looking at that and helping get healthier in that. And if you're struggling with that, if you personally, like, I'm not feeling like I'm exactly where I need to be, not having the impact I want to, or I'm looking at dysfunction in the organization or the team, and we need to help step back and get clarity here on what's really important. How do we leverage all these resources? Your people are your greatest asset. So another component I want you to think about is just this philosophical, I've kind of started this external, internal, and I want to look at your philosophical challenges that come here. This not aligning with your true self. Think about this, the ethics. Think about this. You're not living a true, authentic life. You're coming off fake, and whether you recognize it or not, it's reality. So I want to help you recognize that and embrace it, and then you can make change. You can actually identify, like, okay, how can I be more authentic, David? How can I work through this struggle of knowing who I am? Well, part of that comes through tools and resources I personally used. So one that I really love that I will be actually launching later this year. So if you're interested, message me. I'm happy to respond to you. Is what I call Soul Purpose Intensive. Soul Purpose Intensive is going through some of these different assessments. It's getting clarity. It's giving you the language to use, using things like Powernality, but doing it in a setting that kind of clears away the duff. It gets you in a clear perspective of, well, who do I really want to be? And what do I really enjoy doing? And where do I need to spend most of my time? In Giant, we call this the 70-30 rule. Where should you be most of the time in your presented behavior style? And if you're not there, how do we get you back in alignment? Think about this as like, if you invest in a stock market, there's a rebalancing because things get out of whack over time. And you don't notice it at first, or for those of you that go to a chiropractor, right? You don't know that you get out of alignment initially, but over time, you're like, man, this just doesn't feel right. And so we want to get you back in alignment, want to get you healthy and be the most intelligent human leader. So this will create a sustainability in you over the long haul. This will help you go the distance in your career, in the team that you're leading. It will affect your company, your organization. And think about this. If you're doing this in your business, you're going to be able to carry that into perhaps your marriage or your relationship with your children. And it will show up because then you're the healthiest leader. You can then model what it looks like. And then you can actually call people up and say, you know what? I see how you're reacting here. I see your tendencies or triggers and how your behavior presents itself. And it's not really serving you. It's actually undermining you in the way that you're showing up and the way that you treat the team. And you're actually doing more damage than you're doing good. So recognizing that you can be the agent of change, you have the capacity within you. And that's why we have this podcast. It's to give you the tools and the resources and know, number one, you're not alone. Number two, you have an advocate, myself, David Carr, Steward Your Business, that is here giving you resources and tools. And I encourage you to follow along on all the different social platforms, from LinkedIn to Facebook to Instagram. I even have a TikTok account, so I occasionally post there too, YouTube, these resources. And then I have upcoming free trainings that you can come and check out and just see, hey, David, is this something that will help and benefit me? I'm not sure. I want to know more. Then let me know. I have an updated email list too that I'm sending out information weekly, and I would love to share that with you. So simply reach out to me, send a direct message. I would love to hear from you. If this resonated with you and you feel like it really made an impact today and it caused you to think about your behaviors, how you're showing up, what are your tendencies and triggers, whether it be in the external world with the markets, you're working with the clients, or the internal with your teams, yourself, I would encourage you, please leave a 5-star review, go to Apple or whatever the podcast platform that you like listening to, leave a comment, a like. That helps me get the message out. And that's a way of giving back to me as you've taken and absorbed this. Hopefully, again, my benefit is to bring you value and victory in your life through being the most intelligent human leader. I invite you to come back next week where we continue this discussion and look back for other ways that you can show up in the most powerful and impactful way in your business, in your life. Appreciate you guys. Have an amazing day. We'll talk to you soon.